Hello and welcome to the show. And today, ladies and gentlemen, for your viewing pleasure, I'm going to try to convince you why managing IT infrastructure can sometimes feel more akin to building a snowman. No, bear with me. I promise you it does make some sense. And at the same time, my guests today will do their very best to reassure us that securing a snowballing IT infrastructure doesn't have to result in frost-bitten fingers. Let's meet our guests. And speaking of cool and maybe a little bit chilled, let's meet first our regular guest, who is Meta Compliance Chief Evangelist and author of Cybersecurity Awareness for Dummies, Robbie O'Brien. Hello, Robbie.
Hello, David. So we're going to be a little more technical today with security infrastructure, which is a people thing as well, right? Because, you know, the security systems people have constantly to make decisions and communicate with leadership about the technology platform that essentially runs the business. Anyway, I'm excited to dive into it.
As indeed am I. And well, let's see if our special guest today is as well. We have joining us cybersecurity advisor and CISO Derek Johnson. Hello, Derek. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Glad to be here.
I'm very well. Where is here for you? Because that's a distinctly, as I would say, across the pond accent.
Yeah, I'm in New York State, East Coast US. So it's a nice, bright, sunny day here. So, looking forward to what the day has in store for me. It's in the morning here. So just getting kicked off.
Lovely jubbly. Well, I will be over in New York next week myself at a conference full of CISOs speaking about some of this stuff. But I think we're going to have a bit of a unique take today. But before we dive into that, Derek, just give us a bit of a potted history of Derek Johnson. What's your professional story?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in cyber for just over 26 years, I would say. Prior to that, I grew up in kind of a, system administrator, network engineering type of a background. And I've always liked sort of that technical infrastructure, area of networking or of IT. And I gravitated into cybersecurity in the late 90s, getting into things like penetration testing, but always concentrating more on sort of how to fix the problems and how to better security, how to advise customers and things like that, that can improve their security situation rather than just saying, here's what's wrong, here's a quick fix or a quick patch or something like that. And then I moved into a CISO role about 22 years ago, which was a bit of a shift for me because it really kind of broadened my reach a little bit and my understanding of cybersecurity, getting outside of that more those more technical component areas and getting into the less technical but more critical areas of cybersecurity, which is the foundational policy and governance and all of those components that make up the complete cybersecurity program, operations security, incident response, all of that type of stuff. So and then I took that knowledge back into cybersecurity consulting for about 20 years or so. That allowed me to take all of those experiences prior into other organizations to help improve their security across the board, across multiple domains.
Sure. That background in infrastructure, obviously, that's something that we'll be leaning into a bit today. And that's a similar background to Robbie's and mine in many ways too. Finally, for the kind of setup, if you like, Derek, if you have a guiding principle or kind of guiding approach to your work now as a CISO and cyber advisor, how would you describe it? What's your secret sauce, Derek?
Well, you have to, I think in my opinion, you really have to take more of a business-centric approach to cybersecurity. I talked about how getting out of that more technical component really broadened my understanding of cyber. But it really stretches into, how does cyber protect the business, right? And how because that's ultimately what the task of any CISO or cybersecurity arm is really just to protect the business. But you have to understand, to do that, you have to understand risk profiles and manage that risk effectively. And more importantly, you really have to be a business enabler. You have to get out of this mindset that some CISOs and some security professionals get into, which is, say, no, you can't do this. Just flat out, that's against policy. You can't do that. And get out of that sort of mindset and into okay, well, this is not really helpful in protecting the business, but let's see, I see what you're trying to do here. Let's see if we can get this going, but in a more, a more risk-friendly type way, providing those solutions and alternatives that can help IT departments do their jobs more effectively, of course. Yeah.
Super. So how about we dive into today's topic? I opened the show today by talking about why managing IT infrastructure can be a bit like building a snowman. And what I'm talking about there really is the L word, not learner, but legacy. And the thing about legacy is that it has a bit of a habit of sticking around. And the longer that legacy systems do hang about, the more that newer systems tend to get wrapped around them. And it's just like a snowball rolling down a hill, growing in size, growing in weight until it all becomes so large and so dense. It's less a case of you managing it, but its sheer size managing you. Now, mentioned that I think we've all come from an infrastructure background one way or another. My first job in a data center was in the 90s, and we were working on assuring that systems there were millennium compliant. Remember the millennium bug? Oh yes. In our data center, I think we had 6 machine room floors and then 4 kind of office space. There was an entire floor 2, I think it was, that was expressly for the legacy systems, and these were big, hulking, great big machines that dated back to the 80s with software that I'm sure dated back as far as the 70s. And I happen to know that even into the 2010s, they were still there and still switched on. We're talking, COBOL and stuff like that I'd never really seen in the real world anywhere else. And despite many companies at the time having a long time to plan for Y2K, so entwined with those legacy systems in the processes, in the technology of the company, that they just didn't feel they could safely migrate away from them and switch them off. And instead, what they did is practically wrap them in cotton wool, paid a lot of money to in-demand COBOL programmers and sysadmins to keep those machines purring long beyond their best before date. And that's what we mean, I think, by this ball and chain of legacy systems. The more you have, the bigger that snowball inevitably becomes. Robbie, you've spent your fair share of time getting frostbitten in data centers too, and they were really, really cold. They probably still are. The pain from that those legacy systems pose from a service management point of view is one thing, but what about from a cyber and information security point of view? What kind of challenges do legacy systems pose there?
So I think the entire infrastructure estate that the organization is based on, if you're a startup, if you're a scale up, if you have the luxury of, starting from a greenfield site, you can put into place an architecture that's state of the art, protected in the more modern ways. But even at a personal level, right? I subscribe to the Apple ecosystem, for example, and I'm already between my laptop, my desktop, and iOS. I'm between 3 operating systems. I haven't had the time to sync them all up, and indeed, one of them is really advanced, so it's the latest. The work one isn't. And I don't really want to, because the laptop isn't, it's about 3 or 4 year old. It's, it's a load of work, right? It's a load of effort to do the backup, build the systems and so on and so forth. And it's no different for organizations. Only I think the decisions that happens within organizations cost huge amounts of money to remediate the issue at hand, and people take their time. Can we wait another 6 months? 6 months becomes a year, and as you sort of have a convoy in my mind's eye. I see it's like a convoy almost of technologies, moving along, trying to support the business. it becomes increasingly more difficult to keep each piece of technology patched, up to date, without there being a knock-on effect to some other system that might be reliant on it or adjacent to it. And there's in most of the organizations that I have been exposed to, there is this technical debt that is an amber in the overall scheme of things. It's could be a red, but it could be described as an amber. And so therefore there's a lot of risk acceptance of these ambers, a lot of risk acceptance of things that maybe today is not a dumpster fire, but when it comes to cybersecurity, well, this is just meat and potatoes for exploits and for bad actors who are looking for a particular technological recipe that they can exploit. And if you take one step further, because I think it's a really interesting area, is the area where you have equipment that is managed by information technology, but it might be a different type of technology. It could be operational technology. It could be medical technology. So medical equipment will last 15 years, whereas an operating system will last 5 maybe. So you're constantly seeing this situation where this you have to upgrade the machine, but the machine will not work with the version of the device or the version of the operating technology. And so you're getting these artificial air gaps being applied between older, still functional, still fit for purpose, operational or medical or critical infrastructure, and this technological information security problem that is stopped because the operating system isn't supported by Microsoft anymore, or the vendor of the software that's running on it decided to end of life it. And those are problems that CISOs and CIOs didn't ask for, right? They've enough problems, and we sort of just live with that. We just live with that constant inconvenience, pain, call it what you will. But at the same time, it represents a huge cyber threat.
Derek, what's your take on this? And if you are helicoptered into an environment where you are tasked with managing a lot of legacy kit, the business has made the decision that it's going to be sticking around, I'm sure for good reasons from a business point of view, what are the best efforts? What are the best practices to keep them secure? Is it about wrapping them in cotton wool, ensuring that there are air gaps and so on in place? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, that's really it's a common situation that we've seen, that I've seen even in my consulting career, is an organization that has relied so heavily on an accounting software or some sort of payment processing type technology, a payroll application, whatever it may be. It's running on a legacy system because it can't run on a newer system. The software can't be upgraded because the developer isn't even doing that type of work anymore. It doesn't or the company has folded, whatever it may be. I mean, even there was a point in time, I think, in our careers where Novell systems were its systems at the time, and Microsoft was really the up and comer in terms of an enterprise infrastructure. And so I might be dating myself, of course, here as well, which is to say things like 3-com routers, right? 3-com switches. I mean, those were not exactly as those weren't as prevalent, I should say, as Cisco, but they were certainly nipping at the heels, right? And then suddenly they fold. So it's things like that you have to kind of consider evaluating third parties a little bit more, putting them under a little bit more of a microscope, understanding their business practices, their longevity. Knowing things like, okay, if you do get acquired by another business, what is your game plan there from a customer perspective? Do you just say to the new business, okay, here's all of our customers, you guys deal with it? Or is there a transition to a new platform? And, if an acquisition does happen, what does that look like for what you've already invested in? Now, when it comes to kind of those legacy systems, and you mentioned about, helicoptering in and, figuring out what to do in those situations, you really have to look at it from kind of, putting rings around those systems, right? So if a system can't be upgraded, say from Windows NT 4, for example, you'll want to look at, okay, how do you wrap security around that? What are the monitoring controls of that system? What can you do in front of that system from a proxy perspective to, evaluate the connections and the data flows and the access requests and things like that might be able to help you from an overall cybersecurity standpoint and adhere to your now changed cyber policies on those legacy systems. Yeah.
I'm sure that many an IT manager has, when surveying their complex multi-platform, multi-generational sprawling estate before them, wish that they could wave a magic wand that with a mere waft would standardize everything before them. Well, as they say, be careful what you wish for, because Derek, as we've seen in the news recently, there are also significant problems that need to be understood and addressed when consolidating infrastructure onto fewer platforms as well, aren't there?
There are, right? And we've seen this, like you mentioned about news recently with things like CrowdStrike and everything. And you start to say, okay, well, do we put all of our eggs in the Windows basket? Do we put all of our eggs in the endpoint security basket, vendor X, right? And that's kind of where it gets to be, really complicated from a risk management perspective, because you have to look at it as, all right, well, one thing that, and I don't want to make it seem like, we use a term here in the US, we call it armchair quarterbacking, right? I don't want to make it seem like, okay, this has happened. Now I can overanalyze and this is what, company X should have done in this situation, because let's face it, a lot of companies fell victim to this outage because, well, frankly, they thought, that CrowdStrike had practices in place that would allow for automatic updates and that those automatic updates would not conflict with the operating system. Well, obviously in those cases, we were wrong. It happened. So what can we do to learn from this is really what we have to take a look at and say, okay, now do we want to diversify our systems? Do we want to, which can be very complicated in a large organization, right? You might say, well, okay, I could have one terminal at a gate at an airport on Windows and the other on Linux, but that becomes an administrative nightmare in that case, right? So what can you do from as more of an overall cyber resiliency perspective? Do you look at how you secure your backups, how you have access to your backups? In a virtual instance, can you recover faster on a virtual system by just standing up a new virtual system and redirecting the user to there, for example? Or can you, one of the things that I think really hurt some organizations in terms of the recovery from that CrowdStrike incident is cases where Windows was running BitLocker, for example. And that's kind of a more, a very secure way to run Windows, which is great. The problem with that is from a recovery perspective, if you don't have access to, the server that contains the keys that you might have to input manually, then that becomes a challenge in and of itself. And that's what hit a lot of organizations was they put CrowdStrike on the system that stored the keys as well. So, and they couldn't get access to those keys. So it became more of a chained recovery effort in that case, and that prolonged the response. So do you now say, okay, well, let's look at how do we recover from a particular incident in this case? Maybe the key server is running a different endpoint protection platform. Maybe it's running on a different operating system. One thing to note too is CrowdStrike did also affect other operating systems earlier in the year, right? We saw it with like Red Hat and other Linux platforms. I think it was back in June or July, maybe April or basically late spring, early summer. But because a lot of organizations don't run critical applications and things like that on Linux systems, it wasn't really important in the press, and there wasn't a widespread outage. But because at this time it affected Windows, that became that widespread outage. So I think just focus on that cyber resiliency program. How do you recover from any type of issue, any type of response? You can't predict everything that's going to happen, but you can certainly predict the steps that you're going to go through to recover a system.
Robbie, what's your take on the learnings? And again, just to be very clear, we're not stabbing CrowdStrike in particular here. No. It's an example, a very high-profile example, and a warning for many people who weren't affected by it of what can happen when you are reliant on a single vendor, single platform, and so on. Robbie, what's your take on the learnings here? And again, having been in a position where, as a business owner, and also as a data center, so someone in charge of parts of data centers, that consolidation and standardization thing is very, very tempting. But as we've discussed, there are dangers to it as well.
So you have cyber as a real and present danger, but then you have the fact that things haven't become any simpler. If anything, the whole sort of digital reinvention has made things more complex. True, with cloud, AWS and Azure, you have much more friendly service interfaces, but the underlying technology on which the data assets are sitting, your information assets are sitting, it is still complex. And it's easier, I feel, for enterprises who can pay the right amount of money to attract the right level of skill set to address those complex environments. But an Azure instance or an AWS instance is the same interface as an SAP will have. No, I know there's different tiers of what you buy in terms of your infrastructure, but essentially it's there isn't like an easy Azure and then a difficult Azure. It's still, you still need the person who's managing your infrastructure to know what they're doing. And so I think you have the constant fear of outages with cyber, and then you have the sort of age-old IT operational challenges associated with change control, associated with business continuity. And if you say, what are the learnings from this? Well, I think Derek just pointed out one of the learnings is that people are going to investigate their infrastructure, their centralized infrastructure, and see if there are these sort of gotchas where the keys are behind the network. But also, I think an awful lot of people were able to determine whether or not their business continuity process worked or not, and clearly some didn't. And that's the issue. It's like, have you actually done your incident planning? Have you actually got the executives? Because I think a lot of of the types of cyber incidents affect one company, but when it affects like WannaCry and like the CrowdStrike, when it affects what it seems like the whole world, right? It seems like it's almost a cyber war issue. Then that makes everything the stakes much higher. And it's times like that I think people truly understand the vulnerability that we all face with this digital dependency.
A lot of this stuff is all well and good if you're a big enterprise player, but as we say time and time again in our conversations on this show, what if you're a small business without the dedicated resource? You still have infrastructure depending upon where you fit on that SME scale, but you've still got infrastructure. You are still exposed to the kind of challenges that we're talking about here. But that's it. They are real challenges. If you don't have a CISO, if you don't have at least somebody who is trying to keep across the incident response plan, who is trying to keep across what the various failure scenarios are and what your response to those might be.
a lot of those, if not the majority of those companies, don't have a CISO. I mean, if we're lucky, they have an IT manager of some description, right? Indeed, a lot of people will outsource these roles to various third parties, and actually, that's a good strategy because if someone's sitting in a 200-man company, there's not a lot of work for a CISO there. There isn't enough to keep someone busy. However, those virtual CISOs would have been run off their feet when you see one of these, because it's the worst possible situation. All your chickens have come home to roost at the same time, right? So I think that model really, really good when but just you have some sort of cyber incident, then that CISO will come, knows your systems, knows your data assets, knows your people, has probably been the person who has briefed you, helped you with your incident response plan, will run the playbook, do the quarterback thing for you, and bring it home. And I think the issue here is that all those SMEs are actually sitting on they're like small departments within a big organization, in this case, CloudStrike, but there are many more. I mean, there's many other big structural platforms that people run on, be it even at Amazon or Azure. But I think that SMEs are a really, really difficult issue because they're typically, either fighting for their lives, or they're in survival mode, or they are, running a business model that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So trying to deal with a danger of some description that is, vicarious in some way, it's hard for them to put real dollars behind that. And so they're always going to be the weakest link, even though it's, they're 75% of the economy. They're such a massive part of the economy. And I don't really, I've been thinking about this a lot. I don't see any silver bullet to fix that. It's just time will tell. And it's like the safety message of old. If the bigger companies get involved in it, they get behind it and then start pushing it down their supply chain, saying you can't play with us unless you have this minimum. And that hasn't happened. I mean, that hasn't happened by a long chalk. It'll also happen where the cybersecurity insurance people will come along and say, well, have you got an alarm? Have you got an alarm system in place? Yes. Well, you'll get a cheaper insurance contract if you do. Likewise, if you have these things in place. So I think that'll change the market, but it'll take time.
Derek, Robbie says there's no silver bullet there. Do you have any hope for small businesses, small medium enterprises, on how they can best ensure that their infrastructure does stay as safe as it can be in the face of these threats?
You can certainly quantify the risks, right? You could say, okay, well, if this happens, we're going to lose this much money because we have to shift focus on recovering. We might be down for a few days and we can't make our product because of that, or something like that. And you can certainly quantify that, but you can also qualify it in terms of your brand reputation. Who's going to want to buy your products right now if they understand that, you are wide open and you're not able to secure your business, and, whatever it may be. And I think there are other small businesses that are in, say, like healthcare manufacturing that I've met with that had a lot of strong cybersecurity in their organization because they started out with that awareness. They really educated that's one of the benefits, I will say, of an SME, is that you have the ability, you have few people in your organization, I should say fewer people in your organization than the larger enterprises. And so being able to educate that reduced headcount, it's certainly something that it's a lot easier to do on an ongoing basis. And to have those education sessions. You're in a single office area, everybody knows you. You can have the conversations with people in the lunchrooms, and you can have the conversations even just in a small classroom setting or something like that, to say, okay, well, I understand that you are just, a receptionist or you are just in accounting. But here's where you can really play a key role in our cybersecurity and help us protect our business, because certain things may happen in this business where if, let's say, you can even use a CrowdStrike scenario as an example. Let's say that hits our business, or let's say we're hit with a ransomware and we're shut down. That means you can't come into work. You either have to take a vacation day, sick day, or, we just don't pay you for that day. Now people start to say, wow, that affects my wallet. That affects my income.
Yeah.
So here I am going to make sure I don't click on that link. If something looks a little sketchy to me, I'm not going to click on that. I'm going to forward it to my IT department to have them analyze it, and then they can say whether or not it's okay. Being able to have those education sessions with your user population is highly effective.
Robbie, you're nodding away sagely there. And I'm curious, with your work in cybersecurity awareness training at Meta Compliance, whether that stands true for you, working with smaller, medium-sized companies. It's easier to get that engagement that Derek speaks to. Maybe it's because the front line of the business is more immediate to everyone who works within it.
If you have a leadership, the founder of the company, the people that own it, who actually get it, who recognize that if their payment system, for example, was to go down, they just can't sell, right? They can't go back to take credit card payments with paper anymore, right?
Right.
And when they do get it, I have spoken at a number of events for small businesses, and I find that it's probably one of the most rewarding, because people are looking for real. Tell me what I can do. If I go back to the office, tell me what I can do. You're right, and as Derek says, bring the people into the room and say, these two systems are our biggest systems, or most important systems, and here's why people would like to, stop us getting access to them, steal our money, steal our information. This is why, because I think that's the key. It's workers haven't actually made the connection between the why. Why do we need to do this? Why do we need these controls? Why do I have to be very careful on clicking emails? Why? And that can be very quickly shuttered off in a smaller business, because you have that ability to make the personal connection with the employees.
This has got me thinking a little bit. I'm going to go off track a little bit, but I do a lot of work with smaller, medium-sized companies that literally spin up for a few days and then kind of disappear back down to a core staff. And something particularly immediate that we need to have is a risk assessment for purposes of health and safety and for insurance. And by golly, if there is a 13-amp plug socket in the office where we're going to be working, then there needs to be a kind of health and safety tick box, risk assessment tick box, to make sure that, well, we've got a carpet to cover it over. Everyone's aware that it's there, for example. However, the same level of fastidiousness never seems to happen when it comes to resiliency, when it comes to business continuity. The fact that if that 13-amp plug socket, the plug were to get knocked out of that, then the server that's running the media, that's feeding all of the big screens around the venue where we happen to be broadcasting from, the fact that same risk could knock down the entire operation. Oh no, there's no mitigation for that at all. So it seems to me there needs to be the same sort of processes that we put into health and safety. And this is nothing new, Robbie. We've spoken about this before,
Yes.
But it's just kind of struck me right now. Why do we not have the same kind of tick box in a positive way processes that we have for resilience as we do for some elements of health and safety? And small businesses should be as open to that as the larger ones.
The legal impacts and blowback associated with someone getting hurt as a result of a safety incident is well documented, and it's 30-year-old, 40-year-old type industry, and it's very mature, and so organizations are very sophisticated in how they deal with it in all aspects, both on the consumer side and within the employee franchise. Our industry is still very immature and is constantly changing. For example, now we've got AI, right? And how is that going to work? So we had a situation where we adopted technology as fast as they could load it on us. I mean, the vast majority of people I know took office without ever going on a training course for Excel, Word or PowerPoint. I mean, everybody taught themselves. I'm not suggesting that's the right way, but it just was, it seemed to be that we were newfangled and we just consumed and consumed and consumed. And we are now where we are. And I think cloud cleaned up an awful lot of stuff because everybody had their own little craziness of your internal systems, and you were forced to have a more streamlined and structured approach to these new infrastructures. But the basics are still, we still have to go back and do the basics, and it has really got to do with understanding and documenting what have you got, and focusing on the things that you need to protect, because you can't protect everything, right? It's just not, it's not possible.
Right.
And so the even in old times when you had fortifications, in the middle would have been the crown jewels and the well. So you protect your water supply at all costs, you protect the money at all costs, and then you had the rings of defenses out of that. And it's not really an awful lot of, so they would never have gone and defended something that A, was indefensible or of no value to them. Whereas at the minute we have a one size fits all, you should be able, it's either one size fits all or no size at all. And that's why, frameworks like NIST and frameworks like ISO 27001 actually are great starting points. It means you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Robbie, mentioned something that's really true, which is really focusing on what's most important. So in the case of employee safety, and ensuring the environmental conditions are okay and everything there, organizations are doing that because they see that the employees are valuable to them. If an employee falls down the stairs and they can't do their job, that's going to affect the bottom line. So that's so from a cyber perspective, it's really identifying what's most important to you and identifying sort of that protection zone. What is it that you want to protect the most? What's most critical to the business? Is it a system or is it data, right? And how and where is that zone? Where is that surface? How far does that surface reach across the globe? And once you can identify that critically, accurately, I should say, or even on an ongoing basis, then you can obviously put the protections around that. And there's, you can look at compliancy frameworks and everything there, but one of the things that, I've always advised customers is to really not secure to the checkbox, but secure, but to, I should say, implement the best security, implement what's right for the business. And in doing that, effectively, compliancy is going to really fall in place. And you can use NIST, you can use ISO, you can use all of these as guidance, which is really great. But don't just use that as gospel, right? Don't just use that as, okay, I'm just going to, check all the boxes here and then I'm good. You want to architect your best security, and then you'll find that as you go through those compliancy frameworks, yep, I've already got that. And you can see sort of everything falling into place that way.
And Derek, would you see the whole zero trust concept coming in here as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really one of the things that zero trust concentrates on is focusing in on what's most important, identifying that protect surface, and then just eliminating trust from every connection, every packet, every interaction with that protection surface. So if it's your data, and if it's your critical elements of your data, or just all aspects of your data for that matter, and you've put certain risk categories on different facets of your data, then you could architect your policies and your solutions around that, and taking into account that you're not going to trust employees, as well as you're not going to trust people outside of your organization.
Which leads us on to the final thing that I want to cover today, just very, very quickly. And, we're talking about what's the important stuff that ultimately you're trying to protect there. And then you brought in zero trust as well. It's easy in these conversations to end up talking exclusively about protecting endpoints, protecting devices. But what if we look at this through the lens of protecting the data instead? After all, we call it information security. And one way of thinking about that that's certainly gained some traction over the last couple of years or so, since I think Gartner coined the term back in 2022, is DSPM, or data security posture management. Very much this data first approach. And Derek, I know you've been writing and talking a fair bit about DSPM recently. For anyone who hasn't jumped on board the DSPM train, can you give us a quick 101 on it, please?
Sure. Yeah. So this is really, as you said, it's relatively new. So we've heard of cloud security posture management, cloud security posture management, or even just overall security posture management platforms and vulnerability management. They really take a look at the systems and possibly even applications, environments, if you will. DSPM, data security posture management, that really focuses on the data itself. So it includes things around data discovery, data classification, a utility that will go out and discover data around cloud storage, file systems, email systems, third-party apps, things like that, as well as classify that based on what it can tell, if it has PCI data, HIPAA data, even if it has intellectual property and other types of maybe design data, for example, in a manufacturing organization. It can map data flows. So it can really give you an idea of what data is interacting with, right? Is it being read by an application, being fed to a user base? Is it flowing between a file system into a database? Things like that. And then it can assess the risk based on that. So it sees, okay, this user is grabbing this data and moving it over here, but they're moving that onto a system that might be less secure. So it changes that risk profile. And so not only can it identify those vulnerabilities of the systems, or at least read that sort of information, but it could also identify misconfigurations. It can identify the fact that you allow access to confidential data from one user entity as well as another user group that might not need to see that data, for example, or might.
And to Robbie's point a minute ago, that's where there's the overlap with zero trust.
Exactly. And so that's one of the things that I wrote about recently, is how a tool like this can really inform a zero trust environment, right? Sort of the brains and behind the policy decisions in a zero trust architecture. Because of the fact that it can also do monitoring and auditing, right? It continuously monitors the flows and where the data is going, and sort of the security state of that data. Is it encrypted or is it not encrypted? Is it sitting on a protected system or not? So if a zero trust architecture and sort of that policy engine understands that you're trying to access data on a particular system, a DSPM system can easily inform that policy to say, oh, something has now changed in that risk profile. Let's cut off access. Let's one of the things DSPM solutions can do is also auto remediate, which, of course, can be a bad thing. It can be a good thing, depending, but maybe it sees that confidential data is not encrypted and it encrypts it, right? Or it halts, it tells a control plane in a zero trust architecture to say, okay, just hold on that access request for a little bit. I'm going to secure this data, now apply the access, or something like that. There's all sorts of use cases where DSPM can play a critical role in those policy decisions.
I think this is something we're going to come back to, Robbie. It sounds fascinating, but both from the technical point of view, but as to what that means when it comes to securing our environments.
Yes,
I think we're going to be out of time for today, though. Lots of ground covered today about securing different types of infrastructures, whether on-prem, hybrid, or cloud, whether you've got pockets or entire machine room floors of legacy, or the challenges then of consolidating onto fewer platforms, and of course, different perspectives on securing the all-important information itself, focusing on the data, not necessarily just on the device. Derek, thank you for rolling us down the hill there. We've certainly gathered a lot of mass and information over the last 45 minutes or so. Listen, where can people find out more about what it is that you get up to, and more insights that you share on things like DSPM and much more?
Well, I would say my LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn profile is probably the best way to go. It's linkedin.com/in/Derek Johnson, all one word. I post, I don't post, I can't say I post every day, but I do post certain things here and there. And, but yeah, that's a good place to start. And there's also links in there to other blogs I've written as well.
I'm impressed, your LinkedIn URL. For as long as I've been on there, it's not something I've ever memorized before. So good on you for that. Listen, thank you very much indeed. Robbie, how best can we keep up with you and your musings and insights?
People can see my rantings on LinkedIn as well, and on Twitter. Unfortunately, Derek has showed me up because I don't know what my LinkedIn handle is. It's on. I'm going to have to study. But yes, and also on the Meta Compliance website, people can contact me there too.
Fantastic. Well, listen, once again, thank you for joining us, Derek.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you too, Robbie, as always.
As always, thanks.
And thank you all for joining us too. Until next time, bye-bye.